glaringly obvious thing took you forever to realize. Story 1, that the popular kids in school weren't all obnoxious, soulless conformists. Rather, they were just normal people with good social skills, and that having good social skills is a valuable thing. There were a few bad apples in the A-list crowd, of course, but most of them were decent folks. The reason they didn't want to be friends with me wasn't because I was too much of a rebel, a maverick, or whatever. It was because I didn't have the self-esteem to even give them a chance, and I was probably obviously kind of a mess. I'm shocked now at how entitled I felt to have everyone's adoring approval when I was that age, and how resentful I was not to have it. It's as if I thought that because I read The Stranger on my own, I should be made prom queen and class president or something. Story 2, I didn't realize that FedEx and Federal Express were the same thing for a very long time. On the opposite, I didn't realize that USPS and UPS were different things for a long time. Story 3, breakfast means breaking your fast, the fast being while you were asleep. I was 25 years old when I came to that realization. The fact that it took me so long to realize this really had me questioning my intelligence. Story 4, I had friends with a dog. Dog's name was Diageek. About 3 years in, I realized suddenly the dog's name was not Diagee, it was D-O-G-O, and I'm an idiot. Story 5, when you tell someone see you later, and they reply not if I see you first, they're actually saying that you want to see them, because as soon as they see you, they will avoid you. Story 6, don't laugh at me. That the term redneck comes from their necks literally going red from being out in the sun, in black. So keep in mind, sunburns have never been a problem for me. About a month or so ago, my roommate, who works in construction, came home, and while he was sitting on the floor in his room, I noticed how red the back of his neck was and commented on it. He goes, I'm a redneck, and it finally dawned on me. He notices the look on my face, and I immediately say, now don't laugh at me. And he goes, you just realized where the term redneck comes from, didn't you? And proceeds to laugh for a solid 10 minutes. Edit, a lot of people going on about how black people do get sunburns, and while yes, it is possible for brown people to get sunburned, it's not nearly as common. A day at the beach for me means SPF 15 at the most, and I'm fine. Story 7, what the little metal tab of a wine opener is for. I was, I think, 23, and have been working at a brew pub for 2 years when my coworker says, dude, how do you think the girls open the wine bottles? I'd been brute force yanking them out with just a corkscrew, but I could do it so fast that nobody noticed I was doing it like an idiot. Story 8, that the Beatles is a pun. I never thought about it, because the Beatles are just the Beatles. They were bigger than the wordplay, but it's a pun on beat, like music and Beatles. When it dawned on me at age 28, I felt like the biggest idiot. Story 9, maybe due to being in the UK, but it took me a long time to realize that the map joined at the back is a globe, and that Russia is America's neighbor. The Cold War made a lot more sense after that. Story 10, how much of an effect your diet plays on your health. It seems so obvious now that food is literally what makes you up, but it seemed like some phrase people say but never really resonated. Kind of like when I was a kid, I ate what tasted good, and that continued on into my early 20s. I thought I ate pretty healthy because the frozen dinners and takeout had small portions of corn and other vegetables, right? When I got sick and would get medicines that wouldn't help me and doctors that didn't have much advice, I thought I was just broken before I even turned 25, and that my life was just going to be a constant battle. Then I started hearing people like Michael Pollan and Gary Taubes on podcasts and cut out soda, sugar, and processed foods on a lark, and started cooking things that didn't come from a box, and it was like a cloud was lifted. Story 11, it took me 21 years to realize that when people talk about Michael Myers from the Halloween movie, they aren't talking about the famous actor Michael Myers. Story 12, Hooters is not an owl restaurant. As a kid, I once asked my mom if we could go eat at Hooters, and she then got really annoyed. It took me around 10 years to understand why. Story 13, that little gas pump symbol by the gas meter on the dash of cars indicating what side the tank is on. I think I was in my late 30s when someone told me about it. Story 14, the symbol on a USB cord stick is always on the face up. There should be absolutely no reason why you are plugging in a USB device upside like I've been doing for the last 20 years. Edit, thanks to everyone for pointing out that perhaps I'm not as dumb as a bag of rocks in this department, and poor engineering may be to blame. Story 15, Ford Prefect on jumping into hyperspace in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's unpleasantly like being drunk. What's so unpleasant about being drunk? You ask a glass of water. I knew that line by heart since the 1970s, and it took me until the late 90s to get the joke. That K jeweler slogan, every kiss begins with K, is a lot more clever than I originally perceived. Story 16, curry isn't a specific spice. Neither is paprika. I never really thought about it. I just assumed they harvested curry seeds or paprika plants and made powders out of them. Story 17, wasn't until I read the trivia. In Spaceballs, there is President Scrub. That's Brooks backwards. Shout out to Mel Brooks. Edit scrub is Brooks jumbled, not backwards. Story 18, it was last week that I learned what a POTUS and a FLOTUS is. I would see it scrolling through my Facebook feed and pass it thinking those two words were the new bullshit buzzwords. But I finally made the connection between the terms and the pictures. Story 19, Ed Stark's best friend was Robert Baratheon. John Aaron was his father figure. His brother was named Brandon. His sons' names are Rob, John, and Bran. Story 20, that snowflakes are actually itty-bitty little things, and not those huge, magnificent works of art the size of people's heads you see in Christmas cartoons. I'm from Hawaii, but I saw snow quite a few times before I moved away for college. Still, it took me until I was 19 or 20 to figure that one out. Was pretty disappointed TBH. Story 21, you know, in that 70s show, where they smoke pot in the circle in the basement and laugh and have deep thoughts. Yeah, I didn't know that they were getting high until I was 23 or 24. I thought they were just really happy. Story 22, they're called pancakes because you cook them on a pan. To be fair, though, I think this is because of the language barrier in Mexico. We call them hotcakes. That's not a translation BTW. We use the English word, some people even pronounce it as jotkais. Story 23, that the weird symbol in the Disney logo is actually a D. Story 24, my ex-girlfriend, as well as her parents and sister, never realized everyone in the Caribbean was black because they were descended from slaves. They just never thought about it. Story 25, once, in the earlier years of our relationship, my now spouse and I were packing for a short trip. And I was figuring out how to pack when we only needed 2 days worth of stuff, but still needed to check a bag. So we didn't wrangle our toiletries through TSA. My much smarter, better half just looks at me and says we could just share a bag. I shatter pause for a good minute. It had never occurred to me. She still teases me about it occasionally. Story 26, that there is no artificial gravity on our spaceships like the ISS. Grew up watching so much Stargate and Star Trek that I just assumed it was a logical thing that already existed. Was well into my teens before I put that together. Story 27, when I was younger, people used to always have laser tag parties at Laser Quest. They said to shout out Marshall if you needed help. I thought the guy's name was Marshall every time I went, and that he just had a haircut. I was a smart child. Story 28, that the extra clicks when you're turning your steering wheel with the turn signal on is the turn signal registering the turn, and then turning off. Just thought my steering will like to do some bonus clicks every now and then. Story 29, State of the Union, means the condition of the Union. I thought it was just the traditional name of the speech event for way longer than I cared to admit. Story 30, I had a buddy in the Navy. We are hanging out off duty. He is cutting his nails. He looks up in astonishment and tells me, I just realized if I don't cut my nails so short, they don't hurt. Story 31, oh, I just remembered one. Up until 10th grade world history in high school, although the U.S. colonies were like part of England, as in, physically, I imagined a very English-appearing city that was densely packed and patrolled by redcoats, with cobbled streets littered with the writings of John Locke. They were basically British, except for some reason they weren't allowed to leave the colonies, and all of their goods had taxes on them, because the British were evil and controlling and militaristic. Before having my mind blown in world history, I could have confidently told you a version of the Civil War that was way different than what actually happened, apparently. I still like my version better. Honestly, I think it would make a cool alt-history work of fiction. Story 32, not me, my girlfriend in college, and through a little after, she was studying to be a teacher and had to do some kind of basic science class. She comes over after class one day and says, did you know penguins are birds? Yes, wait. You knew that they have flippers and those fin things are wings. Yes, they just can't fly. How did you get this far without knowing that? I guess I never really thought about it before. They were just penguins. Story 33, having mild autism. It took me an extended amount of time to figure out. Eye contact, polite smiling, many things that are implied, but to me were not obvious. Countless times I couldn't figure out what I looked like to somebody else. It was hard to put myself in someone else's shoes. Story 34, 60-100. I got confused because 60 seconds is 100% a minute. Years of quiet, embarrassed childhood confusion until one day, it just occurred to me that we agreed that time works in base 6. How weird. Story 35. I was recently sitting in our living room eating almonds, and I came to the realization that they taste an awful lot like almond paste. I then realized what almond paste is made of. Didn't tell anyone about that one. Story 36 years ago. In the building that I lived in, there was a girl that I would make small talk with in the elevator and lobby. Casual, hey, great weather, got any weekend plans type stuff. Sometimes she was really happy to see me and wanted to talk a lot. Other times she was weirded out in a why the, is this guy talking to me kind of way. I noticed that when her hair was up, she was friendly, and when it was down, she was standoffish. I thought maybe she was bipolar or something. Then one day, the elevator door opens, and there are two of her. My eyes got huge, and I blurted out twins because I'm just smooth as... The girl I knew started laughing, and the other one still looked at me like, why does this guy talk to me? Turned she lived with her identical twin sister. It took me a year to figure that out. Story 37, that the cursive Q looks like a 2 because you're not making the loop big enough. If you exaggerate the loop so that it connects with the top of the letter, it actually looks like the letter. It's supposed to be Miss Easterbrook. Story 38, when my brother and I were kids, my mom told us that if you peed in a pool, a chemical in the water would make a red dot follow your butt around the pool, and everyone would know you peed. I was embarrassingly old when I figured out that this was garbage, like 14 or 16. Story 39, that you can't make everyone like you. There's a ton of people in this world. There's no way to make everyone happy. If you encounter someone that doesn't click with you, move on with your life. It's fine. There are many others that will. Story 40, that I'm allergic to apples and plums. It's actually apparently a very common attitude with PPL with mild to moderate oral allergy syndrome, OAS. I just thought it was normal for your lips to go itchy and numb and blamed the juice for drying out my skin. Also, apples were kept in the fridge when I was a kid, so thought it was just a factor of biting into something round and cold. But turns out this is not normal, and apparently it can get worse with more exposure. And it took me 24 years with pediatrician parents, no less, to figure out this is not something everyone has. Story 41, when my baby was 4 months old, my husband was holding her. I was looking at her little toes and realized her pinky toe was underdeveloped, half the length and width, and a needle-like microscopic toenail growing straight up. When I touched it, it fell out. It's grown back several times. It could be easy wiggle out. She's 3 now and calls it her special toe. Story 42, when lumberjacks yell timber. They're saying the word timber. I always just conceptualized it as a word that meant the tree is falling, look out, and believed that it was its own word unique from the word timber. Story 43, that the FedEx logo has an arrow in it. It's right between the E and the X. It's in plain sight, and I never knew it. Now it's the first thing I always see when their vehicle drives by. Story 44, in the song Wild One by Faith Hill, one of the lyrics meant to show the difference between her overly conservative parents and her is, she loves rock and roll. They say it's Satan's tongue. For most of my childhood, I swore it was sung as she loves rock and roll. They say it's savings time. I never understood that one. Story 45, that raisins are dried grapes and prunes are dried plums. I was a kid, but like old enough that it was shocking me up for a good minute. I was sure my cousin was revenge trolling me for having recently forged a ransom note in her name. Story 46, I'm ashamed to admit this, but you know the KFC logo, the white image of a smiling Colonel Sanders on a red background. When I was a kid, I always thought that guy has a really weird-shaped chin. I must have been well into my mid-teens when I suddenly saw it was a beard, not a chin. I'm so ashamed I could be so stupid. I've never told anyone apart from now to thousands of people on the internet. Story 47, it took me 20 years before I understood the meaning of the phrase, it's always in the last place you look. I thought the intent behind it was the same as leave no stone unturned or always look for the lost thing in unlikely places. Then one day it just dawned on me that it's meant literally, since no one looks for something after they've already found it. Story 48, it occurred to me sometime in my early 20s that women actually like too. My entire youth, I walked around with the strange notion that women just weren't into, and you had to coax, cajole, and coerce them into it. And even then, they only did it because you begged them and they just wanted to shut you up. But you had to be their boyfriend first and promise to love them forever and ever, etc. Then in my 20s, I finally met that one woman who just loved for its own sake. My mind was blown when she made the first move on me. And when she came like a burst dam all over the sheets, I was like, holy freaking nutballs, to which she just replied, what the are you stopping for? We lay there talking about it after. She told me that most women actually do love just as much as men, but because of shaming, they're not allowed to let on that they're into it. She said she was taught the same as a young girl, too. That was dirty and evil and something only whores enjoy. Later, she just decided if something that feels that good is evil, then it am evil. Why hydrogen peroxide is named hydrogen peroxide. I was in my mid-40s when I figured it out while sitting on the toilet. Story 49, that showing your work is about teaching you the importance of discipline and diligence. Intelligence isn't a free pass to success. You actually have to work at it. Story 50, that token in South Park is called that because he's the token black guy, like his name is literally token black, and it took me until last year to realize, and only after my partner explained it to me. Story 51, that your taste buds change as you get older. Source, I tried broccoli for the first time last night and loved it. Whereas many years ago as a child, I hated it. Story 52, that I had fallen in love with a friend from high school, and the feeling was mutual. Everyone else saw it coming, but us. I was openly pansexual, and she was assumed straight. Well, she wound up being pan too. We got together a year after graduating in 2004, and all these years later, are happily married and still very much in love. Things happened quickly. When it hit me that I was in love with her, I acted on it immediately. She was very responsive to my affections and feelings. Everyone knew we were going to happen, but us so obvious to them, but we were painfully oblivious. Story 53, it took me 12 years to see that the Yoshi's Island stage from Smash Brothers is a pop-out storybook. It's got latches on the sides, and it's even shaped like a book, The Things I Miss. Story 54, that Good Will Hunting was named so. Because of the character, I thought it was a phrase because he was looking for some goodwill. I had never seen the movie in full, still haven't, and all I knew was that there was a line in it about apples, and that people were being to him, hence the search for goodwill. I didn't even know that his name was Will, or that Ben Affleck was in it. I discovered the truth 6 months ago, after reading trivia about a Sunny episode, when Charlie quotes the movie, I am 23. Story 55, the reason it's called Breaking the Fourth Wall, is because we're looking at TV characters through the screen, which would usually be the fourth wall in their rooms, etc. Story 56, that Renat the Onion, is all about articles that sound like they're from The Onion, but aren't. I thought the name meant, oh no, not The Onion, but it turns out all of those headlines I thought were fake are actually real. Story 57, I always thought John Wilkes Booth was acting My American Cousin, then snuck up during halftime and shot Lincoln. Instead, he just showed up to the theater and shot him. My story is much better. Story 58, I took a 2-day motorcycle basic rider course and didn't notice until the second day that the side view mirrors had been removed from all of the bikes, even though we were supposed to inspect and become familiar with our bikes before even mounting them on day one. Story 59, that the things on the back of trucks are shipping containers. It's not so much I thought there was something else, I had just never thought about it before. Story 60, why the Monty Hall problem results in a 23 RDS chance that will get the correct door if you change your answer. The Monty Hall problem, suppose you're on a game show, and you're given the choice of 3 doors behind one door is a car behind the others. Goats, you pick a door, say no. 1, and the host who knows what's behind the doors opens another door, say no. 3, which has a goat. He then says to you, do you want to pick door no? 2, is it to your advantage to switch your choice? I know this doesn't seem like a glaringly obvious thing to most people the first time they hear the problem, but explaining it in a different way makes it glaringly obvious. You can do this by yourself, but the effect is greater if you have a friend play host. Take a deck of 52 playing cards. Shuffle them up real good and decide on one of those cards being the winner. Let's call it the Ace of Spades for the sake of ease. Now with the deck shuffled and the deck facing down, pick any card. Now, with the remaining 51 cards, have your friend or do-it-yourself remove 50 of the cards while making sure not to remove the Ace of Spades if it was still in the deck. Now, do you have a better chance of getting the Ace of Spades if you swap to the card you didn't pick? It should be glaringly obvious at this point that swapping to the host's remaining card has a 5,152 chance of being the Ace of Spades, while your own card only has a 152 chance of being the Ace of Spades. For the longest time, I had people try to explain to me why in a choice between the 2 remaining doors you could possibly have any other odds than 50-50, no matter how people tried to verbally explain to me the reasons. I outright refused to believe it. It was only by chance that one day I was thinking about the problem and decided to try it myself in a practical example using a deck of cards. Story 61, Head Shoulder. It is an anti-dandruff shampoo, and I realize it will clean your head and shoulders for dandruff. English is not my first language, so. Story 62, that my parents had names other than Mom and Dad. I can't remember how old I was, but I know I must have been old enough to know better, due to the fact that when I asked my mom what her real name was, she looked at me like I was an idiot. I guess it had never occurred to me that my parents were real people outside of being my parents. Story 63, that the hole in most bottle caps of cans of soft drinks are for putting straws through. Also, most pots and pans have holes in the handles for you to put cooking utensils in instead of laying them on a paper towel, and I didn't realize the iPhone 7 was waterproof until I dropped it into a mop bucket at work. Story 64 was telling my wife earlier that I was way older than I should have been to realize the E and F on the gas gauge is empty and full. I always thought it was full in e-fuel for some reason. It doesn't make sense. Story 65, kind of obscure and old, but the night at the Roxbury Guys SNL skit where Chris Kattan and Will Ferrell danced to What Is Love were supposed to be on coke, they were always with their noses, which innocent me thought for 20 years was just some throwaway physical gag. It randomly came to me that clubbing staying out all night with their noses coke heads. Story 66. So, when I was younger, my dog was very protective over my family and would be hostile to everyone else. So he was sent to a farm. Fast forward to when I'm 17, and I know that people who send their dogs to a farm really get put down, but my dog was the exception. He was actually sent to a farm. But my finally figured out ripped my dog. Story 67. I had only read the word hyperbole, but had never heard it spoken. In my early 30s, I finally was informed that it was not, in fact, pronounced hyperbole. Story 68, this one's silly, but I still felt like an idiot when I finally realized just recently that the song style by Taylor Swift is about, wait for it, Harry Styles. Story 69, Detroit Tigers fan here. Never understood what the logo was until my early teens. Then I found the font and pressed E, and it all clicked. I always thought the logo was coming to the left, if that makes sense. Story 70, it is just a couple of months since I realized how a double hinge door works. You know, from the saloons and westerns and some doors waiters use in restaurants. The type that swings both ways. It needed a seriously boring shift as a bouncer station next to one of these to figure out. They are double hinged to be fair. In Norwegian, the word translates to swing door, and that is just what doors do anyways. Story 71, Kim Possible is impossible without the K. Weekends are called weekends because they're the end of a week. Oh, and sand shrew is literally just sand shrew. And we all know what eggs really are. Girafarig is Girafarigi backwards. Eakins is snake backwards. Arbok is cobra backwards. Mook is come backwards, and Rotom is motor backwards. Mandela effect time. Mickey Mouse doesn't wear overalls, just shorts, and Pikachu doesn't have a stripe on the end of his tail. Boom, mind blown.